So one really valuable thing to realize about med school admissions is how completely random and unpredictable the process can be. So in this video, I'll be taking you through my application as an example and showing you the results from each of the schools that I applied to. And I'll also be revealing where I'll be attending medical school in the fall. So let's start with the list of programs that I applied to. I applied to 17 schools and I applied solely to MD-PhD programs. In alphabetical order, we have Emory, Harvard, Indiana, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, UCLA, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, UNC, UPenn, Pittsburgh, UW, Wisconsin, Vanderbilt, WashU, and Yale. So my goal with this school list was that I didn't have any schools on there that I wouldn't want to go there even if it was the only place I got in. And that's really something you should think about before you make your school list. Looking back, there were a few schools that I wish I had added, but I didn't realize that until later in the cycle. In the end, it worked out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I finished the secondary for each of these schools, except for Indiana, which doesn't have a secondary. So obviously, this process of submitting your application and trying to perfect your primary and all your secondaries is a stressful process in and of itself. But once you submit your secondaries, all of a sudden you have nothing to do but worry. And so that's what happened to me. I just worried a lot. I actually got my first interview invite about 3 weeks after I submitted my secondaries, so it wasn't that long of a wait. But even after that, I kept on worrying about whether I would get more, and it seemed like until I had final answers from all of the schools, I was just worrying and worrying. You really have to realize that it's out of your hands at that point, and you need to stop worrying, but I realized from experience how difficult that is to do. So I ended up getting interview invites at 11 of the 17 MD-PhD programs I applied to. Those were Indiana, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, Iowa, Minnesota, UPenn, Pitt, UW, Vanderbilt, WashU, and Yale. I attended all of these except for Minnesota, which was scheduled in late February, and the reason that I didn't attend was because I had just gotten my first acceptance just in time to cancel that, and I have nothing against the school, but I would have just rather gone to the place that I got my first acceptance at than had gone through another interview. So if you're keeping track, this means that I got 6 pre-interview rejections, and those were from Emory, Harvard, Stanford, Michigan, UNC, and Wisconsin. You might notice that there isn't a huge difference in the caliber of these schools compared to the caliber of the schools where I did get interviews, other than maybe Harvard or Stanford, which just goes to show you how random the process can be. My first interview was in early October and my last one was in February. Like I said, I went on 10 interviews, and at the end of the cycle I had 4 acceptances, 4 waitlists, and 2 rejections. Post-interview. My post-interview rejections were from Iowa and Johns Hopkins, and my waitlists were at Pittsburgh, UW, UPenn, and Indiana. Indiana technically never got back to me before I withdrew, but I'm calling it a waitlist based on how they responded to that email. So moral of the story obviously is don't mess up the interview, but also I would say that some of those were my stronger interviews, so it really is random at this point as well. So as of the beginning of February, all I had received post-interview were rejections and waitlists. And so I was a nervous wreck because all these other people were getting acceptances and here I was not getting anything. Luckily, my first acceptance finally came in early February, and that was at Washington University in St. Louis. Over the next 3 weeks, I also got 3 other acceptances at Vanderbilt, UCLA, and Yale. The other waitlists and rejections were scattered throughout that time period. So obviously the moral of the story here is don't give up hope because a lot can change in a short time period. In 4 weeks, I went from having no acceptances to having 4 to choose from. Okay, so now that you know what my options were, I'll talk through what my decision-making process was. As an MD-PhD prospect, research was really important to me because you do spend 4 years of your MD-PhD program working in a lab, and you really want to be in a lab that you like and that's doing stuff that interests you. So based on my research interests and people that I had met, I had a pretty good idea of which schools were strong in the area that I wanted. Location was probably the other biggest factor because I didn't want to spend 8 years of my life in a location that I didn't like. So based on those criteria and a few others, I narrowed my options down to UCLA and WashU. I have absolutely nothing against Yale or Vanderbilt, and I was thrilled to get those acceptances, but I was in the fortunate position of being able to make a decision between schools, and I wanted to make that as early as possible, which I always recommend because when you withdraw from a school, you're opening a spot for someone else to be accepted. I will point out that because a lot of MD-PhD programs are fully funded and they pay your tuition and a stipend, that finances weren't really a consideration as I chose which school. I know that for a lot of MD programs that is not the case and that finances really should be a factor as you're deciding which med school to go to. So to make my final decision, I went to the second look weekends at both UCLA and WashU. And ultimately, I decided to go to UCLA. I found it really hard to turn down the research opportunities combined with the LA weather, and all the cool geography nearby. And also, in my opinion, the medical school campus just seemed a lot less industrial than all of the other campuses. And I think this is in part because the medical school campus is connected to the undergrad campus, which was something that I was looking for. Obviously, I'll have to deal with the ridiculous cost of living in LA, but that's something that I'm willing to deal with considering all of the other great things about this school. And I will point out that I did make this decision before waiting to hear back from any of the waitlists because it just seemed so obvious to me after revisiting that I should choose UCLA. Well, I hope this video gives you some insight into how my application turned out. If you're curious on how I got to this point, then you can go watch my video on what my application looked like in terms of stats and extracurriculars. I'll link that up here. And other than that, for all of you applying to med school right now, I wish you the best of luck and hope that this channel is helping in some way.